Welcome to another episode of the Wild Strength Podcast. Today, my guest is Diego Otero, and his walk up song is The Crossroads by Bone Thugs and Harmony. Such a classic. That's too funny. Well, Diego, thank you for for coming on to the podcast. For anyone who's listening, I've never actually met Diego, but we have chatted back and forth on Instagram a handful of times, and I'll let him introduce himself a little bit. But also, he had a story as to why he chose that walk-up song. So if you could kind of say where that song came from, and then just kind of introduce yourself a little bit.
Yes, ma'am. So my name's Diego Otero. I'm 16 years old. I started MainBeam Addiction to inspire and get more youth in the outdoors. And a little story behind that song is ever since I was little, me and my dad have played Bone Thugs and Harmony. He's pretty old school, so that's one of our go-tos, just driving out to camp or leaving from camp in the early morning. So it has a pretty cool story behind it.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. So you're only 16. I imagine you've hunted all your life or as long as you could have, right?
Yes, ma'am. I think I killed my first turkey when I was 8 years old, and from there it's kind of went on from that.
Nice. And was that with a shotgun, with a bow?
It was with a shotgun. I was actually the first youth in New Mexico to kill a Gold's turkey, so it was a pretty
Oh.
big deal. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, that's exciting. Yeah, it's so interesting to me. Like I've only hunted for about 4 years now, so I'm newer to it. But I think it's really cool to see like youth hunting, and like I wish that I was familiar with it as a kid. I had family who hunted, but I always am like, man, I wish I would have started when I was younger. And obviously, there's no better time like the present than to start. But is your family a hunting family? I imagine.
Yes, ma'am. That's a huge thing too. That is why I want to start Main Beam, is because some kids just aren't fortunate enough for that, or they don't grow up in a family that can bring them into hunting. But yeah, no, my dad's been hunting ever since he was little. My mom came from a hunting family, so I'm just super
Nice.
fortunate to be blessed with parents that came from that
Yeah.
aspect.
Do you have any siblings, and do they hunt as well?
Yes, ma'am. I have a sister that she hunts a little bit, but my sister's more on the ag side of the industry. So
Mhm.
she showed livestock, and now she's going to college for ag and business or something. So she enjoys hunting too. Most of the time to kill bigger stuff than me, but that's about it.
That's funny. That's funny how that works. So what made you want to start Main Beam? I mean, you kind of said your reasoning behind Main Beam Addiction, but like as a 16-year-old starting a business, I imagine that wasn't easy. Like, were you is your dad a business owner? Was that kind of where maybe an idea came from, or how did that start?
It all kind of started off because there's a whole lot of the big guys like Hush and Cameron
Mhm.
Haynes and Martin Chag, all those guys, and there's nobody really young in the industry. And at some point, they're gonna age out of it, and there's got to be some up and comers. So that was kind of my goal with Mainbeam, to be the next big business in the industry. And it wasn't so much like trying to sell apparel, and it was more on the hunting industry, just trying to grow it from there and push other kids to be out there, because at the end of the day, we're the future of hunting. So,
Yeah, I think that's super cool. Now in New Mexico, like, are you still able to hunt youth tags, or have you grown out of that at 16?
yes, ma'am. I believe it's funny. Me and my dad were just talking about that last night. He was like, last next year is gonna be the last year you can put in for youth tags. So you can hunt until I think 17. I think if you're 18, you're done with the youth tags. But if you're still 17 and under 18, you can put in for the youth tags here in New Mexico.
Do you know if the youth tags are easier to get or harder to get, or does it matter?
Honestly, the New Mexico draw system isn't the best, and I don't know the last time I put in for a youth tag,
Oh,
to be
really?
completely honest with you. But
So you can even, and I guess, yeah, I moved to Colorado like 2 years ago. So I started hunting in Texas. And when I moved out west, like I was unfamiliar with points, the draw system, all of that. Like I had to learn all of that really fast. But what makes, like, I guess I didn't know that youth could even apply for tags that weren't youth tags.
right, so in New Mexico, as long as you have a valid hunter safety card,
Mhm.
I'm sure you're allowed to put in for hunts. And then of
Okay.
course they do like the encouragement hunts and stuff when you're at a younger age. But I think I was in second. My dad's guided elk hunters for a super long time, and he's been
Mhm.
a guide ever since I was growing up. And he kind of got off of it now that I'm a little bit older, and now he just completely hunts with me and quit the whole guiding gig. But when I was little, my dad was always leaving to the mountains in September to go chase elk or deer or whatever it was, and I wanted to go so bad. And so when I was super little, my dad promised me that as soon as I could learn how to read, he would take me to a hunter safety course so I could get it done. So I was able to get it when I was 8 years old because I learned to read as fast as I could after he told me that. So
Nice, that's awesome. And I guess was it you said you both your dad and your mom hunted, and I imagine you kind of up until you were old enough, did you just kind of go with them, or did you kind of were you forced to stay home while your parents were hunting?
I went with my dad a lot. Most of the time, it was just you know how it is with guides and everything, and so my dad wouldn't take me on those hunts because of course he had hunters and all that. But it's anytime my dad could get me in the outdoors, he would take me. And like I said, my sister's more on the ag side of the industry, and so is my mom. So they kind of do that, and then my dad gets me in the outdoors. But when we could all get out there, it's super fun. But most of the time, it's me and my dad on the mountains. So I kind of grew up by his side going up the mountains ever since I was little. So he was the main passion behind the hunting part of it.
Nice, that's awesome. Have you gotten the chance to, because you kind of said, like your goal is to help like youth and all that get into hunting in the outdoors. Have you gotten the chance to like do any sort of outreach things or like raise money to help someone go on a hunt or something like that yet?
I've done a couple giveaways with some of my followers, like to some younger kids, where we've gave away like range finders and binoculars, and then I help out with like the Turkey Federation down here as much as I can, and just local stuff like that, kind of.
Was your childhood, I mean, obviously outside of hunting, but were you kind of raised on a farm and like as the ag side of it, are you familiar with that too?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, it's been super busy. Well, as I told you when we were trying to plan this whole podcast out, right now we have baby goats hitting the ground that we raise our own goats and then to show. And then we have a ranch out that we 5 sections that we do stuff out there on, and then we farm a little here locally. So my mom and dad actually own a tractor dealership here from New Mexico, so I'm pretty involved in the ag industry, FFA and 4-H and all that good stuff.
Nice. I think that's like really valuable skills to learn at your age. And, I've followed you on Instagram for a little bit. And I always say how much I hate social media, but it's also like really cool to meet people and to find people in the industry and stuff like that. But yeah, I think I was watching a video one time and you had said your age and like you're so well spoken. Like I feel like anytime I meet someone that's a teenager these days, you just can't hold a conversation with them. But I think that plays into like you've been raised outdoors, you've been raised like having to do things. Like I imagine your parents never threw you behind a TV to keep you entertained. Like you've had a farm to take care of, and so I think those are like such valuable life skills for any kid to learn, but especially in today's age for sure.
Yes, ma'am, for sure.
Do you so as starting a business? I get how old were you when you first started MainBeam Addiction?
I think I was about that. It was about when I started hunting, so 9. I think I was about nine
Oh,
years old, and it's funny because there's a big buck that's sitting in my uncle's house, and I kind of just drew my design off that in an art class,
mhm.
and my mom and dad being as supportive as they are, I took that drawing to them, and they helped me start MainBeam Addiction. So like I said, my dad guided all the elk hunters, so I was around a decent amount of elk antlers and stuff. So the main beam. So that's kind of where I got all that from. So I drew up my design and I started that out, and I think we made like 20 hats the very first time, and I took them to our local county fair, and I we have a bunch of awesome people around here. So right away, I sold all 20 of those hats, and Main Beam kind of just blew up from there.
Wow. So as a 16-year-old, you've had a business for about 5 or 6 years now,
Yes, ma'am.
which is like crazy to think about. Were there any, did you start with just apparel? Like, and I also feel like apparel, from what I hear anyways, is a big challenge because not everyone's jumping on buying apparel. But is that kind of how you started?
Yes, ma'am. It was just hats at first, and then I started making hoodies a little bit too. But it's definitely not one of my favorite things to just push apparel. But you can't always hunt, so
Yeah, yeah. From anyone that I've heard who has either like even been in the industry for a long time, or even just has recently started a business in the industry, like just keeping apparel in stock and yeah, pushing it is not anyone's favorite. And I think it's just the keeping it in stock part too, which is the hard part because I'm
Right.
sure you have times where people want to buy it. Maybe it's around the holidays, and then you have months where like nobody gets anything. I imagine.
Yeah, and that's another one too. Is it we actually run it out of our tractor dealership, so I have a little bit like a little booth set up there where I
Cool.
sell a lot of my stuff, and then my mom helps me out with shipping. So super fortunate again. I have really good parents that help me out when it comes to that stuff. So
Yeah. Have you been able to like go around to different like hunting expos and events and stuff like that?
most I usually do the New Mexico Hunt Expo and sell my stuff
Mhm.
there, but sadly, the last 2 years it's been at the same time as Utah, the big one in Salt Lake.
Mhm.
So it kind of just it depends. I haven't been selling as much as I should be, but I've also been meeting a whole lot of awesome people when I go to Salt Lake and stuff. So
Are you going to be at the Western Hunt Expo in Salt Lake?
I was actually gonna go out there with up and coming new company for
Mhm.
youth hunters, but it ended up not working out, and so we're still working on it. So I will not make it up there this year, and I also have a baseball tournament with the high school, so it kind of worked out to where I could be there for my team that I'd already committed to. So, but
Yeah.
sadly, I won't be able to make it to that one this year.
Yeah. So talk about, yeah, like, and you kind of alluded to this a second ago when you were saying just like we were trying to find a time to meet and to hop on the podcast and record. Like, what does a typical day look like for you? I know you said obviously you're 16, you're still in school, but you're working on the ranch and it's hunting season. Like, what does a day look like for you?
What helps out a lot too when it comes to that is I don't know if I'd already told you before is I actually got homeschooled halfway through my freshman year of high school because I was like, this definitely isn't the place I want to be, and so that's been helping out a lot too. And if there's any kids, I've talked to a lot of the hunting influencers and stuff that are older people that have homeschooled their kids, and it's one of the best decisions you can make because you just get a whole lot more done. Like right now, I think I did 3 hours of school before I got on with you, and then after I get off our podcast now, I'll probably go help my grandma with some of the goats that are having babies now and just change out the waters since it's so cold out here in New Mexico, break them or do whatever. And then I've practiced at 4:30, and then we have to after practice, I actually have to leave practice early to go to a FFA event to give thank yous in official dress for some of the sponsors that helped us get to national convention this year.
Mhm.
So today's a super busy day, but usually it's not too bad. I wake up, do some schoolwork, shoot my bow a little bit, try and do a little bit of main beam, go to baseball practice, and then just go hang out with my mom at the tractor dealership or whatever it may be.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I work remotely and it's just been the biggest thing for even hunting period. Like I have a way more flexible schedule. I can squeeze my work in a couple of hours or I can work all day if I want. And so I would agree from like the homeschool perspective that it's probably similar for you. You can make your own schedule. You can do school when you want to do. So you have more time to hunt, you have more time to run a business. Which is good that you realize that early on because I think that's valuable for running a business as well.
Yes, ma'am, for sure, definitely. And we don't have the school calling when I'm gone for 2 weeks on a hunt or whatever it may be. So I think my mom likes it a lot more too when it comes to that stuff. So
Is that something so did you do your whole freshman year like in person in school?
so I went like I said, I went halfway. I went for a couple weeks at the start and I was like, yeah, no, this definitely I could be doing so much more with my time.
Yeah.
And that sounds bad on public schools, but it's true. And so yeah, like halfway through my freshman year, I ended up going homeschooled. My mom made me finish my first semester because that's the way we work things is we finish what we started. So
Mhm.
I finished my first semester and then the schooling I actually went through, I had to retake my whole freshman year. So it took me a little bit longer to start it, but it was definitely worth it for sure.
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. And so before, when I had originally reached out to you for scheduling a podcast, you were about to go on two different hunts. You said you had, was it one in New Mexico and one in Arizona, or were they both in Arizona?
Yes, ma'am. I had one in New Mexico and one in Arizona. So,
Okay. Do you prefer bow hunting or rifle hunting? Do you have a preference, or you just like to get out there?
definitely bow hunting. Over the past couple years, I've kind of grew more towards bow hunting.
Yeah, I went on my first like spot and stalk deer hunt in Arizona last year, and
Right.
I started hunting in Texas, where you're just sitting a blind most times. And well, I think that is actually really good for new hunters. Like it has its, I guess, own unique set of challenges, but to get out into spot and stalk a deer, like that's kind of addicting. Like you can get so close, but you can still fail like time and time again. And I think even for like, yeah, someone your age to learn, like I'll call that a valuable life skill because you're going to fail time and time again and you still want to come back and do it.
Right. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, it's definitely cool too to see the different types of hunting. Like over here, everything we do is spot and stalk mostly. We don't do very much blind sitting or anything when it comes to that. So we actually have some friends out in Illinois, and we hunt whitetail out there, and it's a different type of cold out there, and it's definitely a different type of hunting. Just sitting there hoping something comes through this little plot. So
Mhm.
it's definitely different.
I always say that takes more like mental resilience because anyone can just sit there all day. Like that's not physically challenging, but a couple hours in, if it's really cold outside, like you don't want to be sitting there anymore. And it's like sometimes you don't really care if a deer comes or not because you're just like
Right.
freezing.
Just so freezing.
Yeah, definitely not the funnest. What is your favorite critter to hunt? So New Mexico's unique because you have, and I'm curious if you've hunted them before. You can hunt oryx and there's something else in New Mexico that you can't really hunt anywhere else. What is it?
Uh, Ibex maybe? Is it
Yeah,
ibex?
yeah,
Yep.
oryx or ibex. Have you gotten to hunt either of those before?
I've been on a good amount of orc hunts, and they're definitely one of my favorite critters to hunt here in New Mexico because they're just different animals. They're super. They're I mean they're not as big as a horse, but they definitely got some on elk. So they're big animals, and the meat's crazy good. I've been lucky enough to kill two of them in my time of hunting. So they're definitely cool ones. Ibex, those my dad doesn't deal with snakes, and nobody in our family really messes with snakes. And when
Okay,
those hunts are going on, most of the time, other than the archery one, that you're dealing with snakes. So we don't hunt those very often.
that's valid. Where you live, is it close to like oryx and ibex hunting, or do you have to go kind of go to a different part of the state for that?
um, we're not too far away from that. Everything we're pretty fortunate. Again, we can hunt. Everything's in a couple hours away. We can be hunting Barbary sheep, elk, deer,
Nice.
bears.
That's convenient. What is your, so you said oryx is like one of your favorite to hunt, but like what is one like year round, like deer, elk, bear? Like do you have a favorite that every single year that you look forward to?
Definitely archery elk for
Okay.
sure.
Why is that?
Probably because the first animal I harvested with my bow was an elk that my dad called in to 20 yards of me, and the amount of times that I had messed it up before on some bulls that he had called in for me. So it was a crazy experience. The I had tried killing mule deer. I finally shot an archery mule deer here in New Mexico, and it was after 3 years of trying, and I'd already been on two archery mule deer hunts before my elk hunt, and so I was super excited when I shot my elk because I had been trying super hard on mule deer, and it finally came together on an elk. So that's probably one of my best memories, archery
Mhm.
hunting, and then again doing it with my dad. So probably elk, and then you have those things coming screaming in at you at 15 yards, 10 yards, getting them in close.
Mhm. Yeah, I always go back and forth between deer and elk. Like I, especially if you're hunting elk during archery season, that's oftentimes when they're rutting or close to the rut. So you can call them in, and I like to know that you have that ability of control, for lack of a better word, or you can at least locate them if you can get a good bugle. Whereas deer, you're the only way you're going to locate them is with your eyes.
Yes, ma'am.
Like, there's no calling a deer in, there's no trying to locate them. But I almost appreciate that a little bit more. I think it makes it, like, to your point, you said you had gone on 2 mule deer hunts, and then finally you get to go on an elk hunt and you fill your tag. I think I appreciate a little bit more that it is a bit more challenging. It adds another layer of challenge to it for sure. And because don't most people call them like the ghost of the desert mule deer? Because
They do. I know they. I haven't heard them call mule deer that, but I'm sure they do. But definitely with the coos deer, I know they call them the gray ghost.
yeah, and
Cause
you've have you been on a few coos deer hunts as well?
yes, ma'am. I've been. We had just got back from Arizona 2 weeks ago now, I think, or a week ago when me and you had talked about it. And last year, I had actually missed a really good coos buck with my bow at like I think it was 56 yards. I shot right over the top of him last year. So we
Yeah.
went back this year trying to get some redemption, but the weather was definitely not the greatest, and it's archery hunting, so
Yeah, that's what I always say. It's so funny because I have friends who don't hunt, and I'm like spending all this time out during archery season, and like the days are getting closer, the season's about to end, and the friends who don't hunt are like, "Well, why haven't you filled your tag?" And I'm like, "Do you want to come out here and see?" Like, not everything always plays in your favor. Like, weather is a huge thing, timing, like, there's so much that plays into it. And then also skill level. Like, I'm still very much learning a lot of the times, and I do a lot of solo hunting, so a lot of it's like I'm figuring it out myself too, which has its own set of challenges, but I also really appreciate. Like, I've learned a lot, and so I think that's really cool. But what is your favorite, like, the best hunt that you feel like you've been on so far?
probably the best hunt is I don't know if you've seen on my Instagram, but I actually killed a bear in New Mexico in 2023,
Mhm.
and he was just a great big boar. And me and my dad, we're actually like I said, we're super close to what we can hunt, so it's only 15-20 minutes to where we hunt bears at from my
Yeah.
house. So we I think we had been on a bear like 5 or 6 weekends in a row, and this is when I was still going to school, so it was kind of hard to get time in to go. So we were going every weekend, and it's funny that you say your friends are like that because my mom likes to give me and my dad a little bit of crap. And why are you guys not bringing a bear home yet? You guys have been gone the last 5 or 6 weekends, and me
Yeah.
and my dad worked our butts off. Those spawn stock bears definitely a different type of hunting for sure too. I've been lucky enough to when I was probably 11 or 12, I was lucky enough to kill a bear in Wisconsin with plots. And so
Mhm.
we run a little bit of dogs here in New Mexico and in Wisconsin, and it's fun to watch the dogs work, but spawn stock bears definitely hard. And so me and my dad were able to pull it off on that big boar that's on my Instagram. And I think we were a couple miles from the truck. And I remember we shot him at probably 8 o'clock, and we didn't get back to the truck until sunset. And we brought as much meat as we could, of course, his cape and all that. So it was a long day on the mountain in some super steep, rocky New Mexico country. So that's probably one of my favorite hunts. Another part of that hunt too is I'm sure you know how sharp Havlon knives are,
Mhm.
right? So me and my dad were skinning out that bear, and my dad actually nicked himself on his finger, and so we always carry super glue in our packs, and
Smart.
so it was like we were stopped. My dad, lucky enough, he was fine. We were able to get back to the truck and take care of it or whatever. He didn't need stitches, but my dad actually caught a little bit of his finger whenever he was caping out that bear. And that whole time down that mountain, it was one of the craziest things I've ever seen. The blood just, it was like a stream shooting out of his finger. And
Mhm.
we both seen it at the same time, and we were like, what the heck is that? We thought it was coming from the bear, and it was actually coming from his fingers. So that didn't help. It took us a little bit longer with full packs and rifles and spotting scopes coming down that mountain. And then at the same time, we were stopping every like 5 minutes to get more super glue out of our pack. So it just made more memories for the hunt. So that's probably one of the hardest and one of my favorite hunts.
Nice, that's awesome. Yeah, I have. So here in Colorado, was that a fall or a spring bear hunt?
It was actually a fall.
Oh, nice. Okay. Do you have spring bear in New Mexico?
Yes, ma'am, we do.
Okay. Yeah, here in Colorado, we don't have spring bear. I guess they used to years ago and they took it away. And so hunting and kind of you can speak to this with that hunt too. Like hunting bears in the fall has its own challenges because it's so hot that time of year. They're hiding in thick timber. And so, like, just getting them in the wide open is rare. Oftentimes they're on water, or, yeah, they're trying to just stay out of the sun as much as they can. And the last 2 seasons when I've been hunting elk, I've had a bear tag in my pocket also. And both times I've seen bears, but it's been, I think I've told this story on the podcast before. I, like, last year had one at like 13 yards, but I didn't have an arrow knocked. I was not prepared for a bear to come in whatsoever. I was just sitting a wallow, and I spooked it just trying to knock an arrow because I just wasn't ready. But this past year, I was like, I'm going to put effort into bear hunting. Like, I really want to harvest a bear in Colorado. And like I said, just where I was hunting, there was such thick timber everywhere. So I'd find water, I'd sit water and just kind of wade. And a couple of times, like, they have such good noses, and most critters do, but I feel like bears are a little bit better, honestly, and from what I've heard and read too. And 3 different times I had bears come into where I was sitting, and like I was doing all day sits too. And I would take thermals into account for the morning and like not think about them changing in the afternoon. And they'd come in when the thermals had changed, and you see their little nose pop up, they smell me and they run away. And it's like, man, bears are so challenging that
Right.
time of year too. So that's really cool. And you said that bear was with a rifle.
Yes, ma'am. It would definitely be. It's so rocky and steep around here. That's definitely something I would want to do with a bow, but it would definitely be way more of a challenge. I actually shot my bear. I think it was like 600 yards too.
Oh,
We
nice. Yeah.
do we do quite a bit practicing and long range shooting. And I actually have a custom 7 WSM. So
Nice. Yeah, I hear oftentimes, and maybe it's similar in New Mexico too, but here in Colorado, people will just have, like, you can do bear as an add-on tag in the fall for archery season, and I think during the rifle seasons too. But by that time, they've started to hibernate. And people will say, like, if they have a bear tag in their pocket, they will never see a bear, but if they don't have a bear tag, they'll see bears everywhere.
right.
And then the off chance that they end up seeing one, like, they just, when they shoot a bear with their bow, it was totally not planned. Like, they were elk hunting, they happened to come across a bear and they shot it. And like, very rarely have I heard of anyone like just hunting bear in Colorado just for the sake of hunting bear. I wonder, is it similar there in New Mexico too?
It kind of just depends. We've had some friends that just sit water with a bow, and they've killed a couple bears in New Mexico with a bow. So I guess it kind of just depends on what you want to hunt.
Yeah, that's true. What is the least favorite hunt you've ever been on, or like the most challenging hunt that you've been on?
I would say I don't know if it's my least favorite because it's definitely I don't think I could even have a least favorite hunt,
Yeah.
but probably the most challenging and like you said like teaching moment was that Coues deer hunt last year in Arizona when I missed that Coues buck because it was a couple hour stalk that me and my dad went on. At one point we were crawling with we had taken our Crispies off 200 yards from where we thought he was, and where we were stalking in on him the grass was so tall that we had no idea where he was. And one thing my dad's taught me since I was little is landmarks. Whenever you glass something up or you're going to stalk on something, find a landmark that you can go off of that you definitely know. And there was these two big boulders that we knew he had to been 50 or 60 yards within. And me and my dad made it to the boulders, and there was no Coues deer. We couldn't find him. We couldn't see him. And at one point, it was his doe blew, and we never seen her blow. So we were like, oh, the buck must have been in front of her or something, and we just didn't see him. So we just kept creeping up, and we ended up jumping him, and he had no idea what we were, and that's when I missed that Coues deer. And it's crazy with the grass. I'll take full blame for missing the shot. Like that was my fault because excuses they're just not there to be
Mm-hmm.
had. But
Yep.
my when my dad was ranging, he was like 46, 56, 36, and in that tall grass, his rangefinder couldn't pick up what it was,
Yeah.
and it was less than I want to say less than a centimeter. I was shooting sever, 1.5. So I think if I was shooting um, like a stinger or like maybe an iron will, I definitely would have cut some hair off the top of that Coues deer. But because it was that close of a shot that it was barely a miss on him, but that was probably one of my biggest, like, dang, that almost worked out, but it didn't work out. And like I said, the guys we were with were like, yeah, that's one of the bigger coos deer we've seen out here in Arizona. And I was like, we were 56 yards from him, and I missed
Mhm.
him. So that was it. Not my least favorite hunt, but one of mine that I like kind of wanted to forget about because it sucked. But
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. Like when you started talking, I was kind of thinking like, yeah, I don't know that I've ever had a least favorite hunt or a least favorite moment. Like it's all been a learning experience and like something that's enjoyable. And yeah, I've had moments and also I agree entirely. Like there's no excuse. Like I messed up. Like or
right,
something happened and I couldn't account for it. And at the end of the day, I'm the one, and it sounds like you might be similar. I put all the blame on me, even if it was my bow, even if it was the critter, even if it was someone else. I'm like, man, it was me. Like I could have done something differently. I could have adjusted. And it's like I know a lot of people, and I want to ask you about like your bow setup and all that too. But when I'm shooting like 3D shoots and stuff like that, most people want to blame their bow or their arrow or their release, and I'm always just like, I just suck. It's just me.
right.
Like, I'm not terrible, right? But like, I will definitely say like that I missed that because it was my fault. So you mentioned you were using severs on that hunt, right?
Yes,
Do
ma'am.
you have a preferred broadhead that you like to use?
This year, I actually harvested my deer with the Sever 1.5 hybrids, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that's which ones they are, and I really liked them. I shot my deer at about 30 yards, and my arrow didn't like fully blow through him, but it came out on the other side and but made a hole on both sides, so it was the blood trail was definitely crazy, and so that and then when I shot my elk a couple years ago, I used I don't even they're called stingers. I hadn't
Mm-hmm.
even talked to Sever at all yet or anything, so I was using those, and they were not good broadheads too, but I definitely like the Sever hybrids.
Is the Stinger a fixed blade? I've heard of it, but was it a fixed blade or a mechanical?
It's a fixed blade, yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do you, so then kind of rewinding a little bit, so you've been shooting long enough. Do you still have to kind of shoot a youth bow, or are you shooting just a regular bow at a regular draw weight?
When I had first started archery hunting, my dad got me into it young. Before I was even hunting, I was shooting a bear. I don't even remember what it was, but it was a bear bow, and we had went on a couple turkey hunts. I was trying to kill something with that, but it never actually worked out. But when I shot my elk, I actually shot it with a Matthews Prima,
Mm-hmm.
and I was that was when like the V3 was big, the
Mm-hmm.
Matthews V3. So I wanted to get a V3 when we went to the bow shop, but my draw length was too short. So I
Mm-hmm.
ended up going with the Matthews Prima, and I think I shot my Matthews Prima until the beginning of last year. So like June or July, I actually got a Matthews lift.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I'm shooting now, and I really really like it.
Yeah, that one's I've heard good things about it. My first bow ever was the Matthews V3. And I liked it, but I got the 27-inch axle to axle, so it was really short. And I'm a short person, but like you can tell the difference when you have a short axle to axle and a longer one. You just feel like crunched up in it.
Right?
But I did like it, and I've heard really good things about the lift, and it is one that like youth and women could shoot because it does allow for those shorter draw links, which I think is one thing like I think is really good for you and even for women. Like one thing I struggle with, and not that I have anything against women's bows, but I just hate when I go into a bow shop, like especially when I was getting my first bow ever, and they're like throwing me these women's bows with like super low poundage and all this stuff. And I'm pulling back 60 pounds. So I'm like, I can shoot, and my draw length is long enough to shoot any like standard bow. I was like, I'm
Right.
kind of offended that like you feel like I have to be in a women's bow. So I think the lift is cool because it is one of those bows that everyone wants to shoot and everyone can shoot, which I think is really cool.
Definitely, the with the new lifts too, like the Lift X, and I haven't totally looked into them because when they came out with them, I was like, "Dang, I just bought a lift," and there was
Yeah.
already a new bow. But those ones are definitely cool because I know the Lift X can go lower and everything.
Oh, nice. That's cool.
So
Were you? So you said the first one you shot with was a fixed blade, and now you're shooting mechanicals. And I'm curious, like with, and I'm sure your dad has helped you a lot with this too. But for me, everyone was like, "Oh, you're not shooting enough weight to shoot a mechanical." But that's all I've ever shot, and I've been successful with it every single time. Obviously, you've been successful with the mechanical as well. Is that? Do you prefer that?
It honestly, my dad shot muzzies for the longest time, that like
Mm-hmm.
the old school muzzies,
Mm-hmm.
and I had kind of talked to Sever a little bit about it and what my poundage was before I went to Arizona the year I missed my coos deer, and that's when I first started shooting Severs. So after that, I kind of just stuck with them, and I think I was pulling about 60 pounds when we went to that Arizona trip,
Mm-hmm.
and now I think now I'm pulling 70, and I
Nice.
mean, I when I my deer was quartering away from me when I shot him this year, and I think if he wouldn't have been, and it wouldn't have, I busted through some ribs for sure with that sever, and I think if I would have missed some of that stuff in the way that he was angled, I came out kind of in front of the shoulder,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think I would have blew through him pretty easily. So I think it's kind of just preference a little bit.
Yeah, I'd agree. I even like the only reason I even started shooting mechanicals was because I was still in Texas at the time. I had waited way too late to even like tune my bow for a broadhead. I think it was like, and I would not tell anyone to do this, but once again, it's one of those mistakes where like you learn from. It was like 2 days before I was going on my first deer hunt in Texas, and I was like, I can't kill a deer with a field tip. Like I've got to get broadheads. So I walk in the bow shop and they, what was it that I was using at first? I want to say it was one of the Rage broadheads, but it was a mechanical. And they were like, this is going to fly just like your field tips. You're not going to have to tune your bow for it. And sure enough, like it did fly just like my field tips. But that was the only reason I even started because most times the mechanicals do fly more closely to your field tips. And I just kind of stuck with it because I don't like having to retune my bow for a broadhead. It just, I usually wait way too long and it doesn't do me any good.
Right. That's another reason I really like the Severs too, is they have a little tiny screw that you put into your broadhead, and it turns it into practice mode. So you can shoot the same broadhead that you're gonna harvest something with, because it doesn't dull the blades or anything. So I know I have some friends that shoot the iron wills, and they say that they fly just as good as your field point too. So that's a it's definitely preference.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Because I've heard some people say that about iron wheels, but I've also heard some people say that they ended up having to tune or make adjustments for it. So it's probably even what your setup is, and there's so many things that play into that. But at the end of the day, it is definitely shooter's preference. But you know, on the severs, is it so you're saying you basically can shoot that broadhead? Is it a practice tip that's different from the broadhead, or are you actually shooting the broadhead? They just can make a change to it.
It's the same exact broadhead that you're gonna shoot your animal with. It's I wish I had some of them here. I would show you, but it's literally just a little tiny screw that you put into it, and what it does is it keeps your blades from going out when
Mm-hmm.
they hit your target, because it just like locks them in. So I guess if you were to shoot it a crazy amount, maybe like your tip wouldn't be as sharp. But I've practiced with the one I've shot my deer with this year, so.
Nice, that's awesome. Yeah, I switched to the Beast broadheads this year, and they have a practice tip. But those were amazing too. I got incredible blood trails, and both deer that I shot with it didn't run further than like 30 yards, which was super good. Because with the Rage, actually, I'm not even gonna say this because I don't want to like talk bad on any brand, but like that's the only broadhead I've ever shot with where I have wounded and made impact on a critter and didn't end up putting it down. And every hunter does that at some point, right? But just to know that you did it, like, just feels terrible.
Right. Yeah, definitely one it was isn't one of the favorite things to do.
And
But
as they
I've
say, go ahead.
the beast broadheads they're definitely something else. I've watched a lot of the bow
Mhm.
hunting videos on them, and they're definitely something I would want to try. They look like they're mean.
Yeah, I made a pretty a killer, like legitimately killer frontal shot on the buck that I got, and I'm curious for you for like because I'm still relatively new to all of it, and I don't give myself enough credit sometimes. Like I might be newer, but I shoot my bow and I'm out there all the time. So like I'm definitely getting reps under my belt. But I kind of told myself like ethical or ethics wise, like I probably would never take a frontal shot. I just wasn't confident, and you have such a smaller target when you're taking a frontal shot. But then when I drew back on this deer, it was a broadside shot when I drew back, and he turned towards me, and I'm like, this is the only opportunity that I get. Either I don't get an opportunity or I take the chance at a frontal shot. And luckily, it ended up being a lethal one. But I've actually heard time and time again now that like a frontal shot can be one of the most lethal shots, and oftentimes that's the best opportunity you're going to get, especially on an elk, because they're going to come in to your call, right? So they're going to be
Right.
facing you, thinking that you're another bull. Have you taken any frontal shots, or do you have any preference, or you just taking the opportunity that you get?
I've kind of just both the deer I shot. Like I said, he was courting away, so like I went a couple ribs back to where I could get into vitals, and it wasn't
Mhm.
just and that worked out good for me. That deer didn't go any farther than 80 yards, and then on my elk, it was a perfect broadside shot. And so, but I think you're definitely right. I think a frontal shot, in sometimes it could be more lethal than a broadside shot, and honestly, it might take down the animal faster than just a broadside shot.
Yeah, I have. I was with a buddy last year on an elk hunt, and he shot a bull frontal shot, and funny enough, he didn't hit any vitals, but he did hit the jugular. And so like that's a major vein there that, yeah, once again is a super lethal shot, and it just ended up curling up and bleeding internally. It had somewhat of a blood trail at first, but it definitely completely disappeared after a little bit of tracking. But once we found it, like blood had just started clotting inside, and there was no way it was going to go any further.
Right. No, there's definitely a little bit of luck played into that stuff too.
For
I've
sure,
seen
that
I've
was more
seen a couple
intentional.
YouTube videos where people have hit way back in the hind quarter, but they've hit arteries, and that deer didn't go any farther than it would have if you would have shot it in the heart. So,
Yeah, that's definitely luck. I have a friend too who shot an antelope. He got the oh shoot, what is the vein that's like in the back? The femoral vein, I think it was. And like it looks like it would not have been a lethal shot, but if you hit one of those major veins, like it's going to. But once again, pure luck, right? Like it was
right,
an I think an 80-yard shot and like 20-mile-an-hour winds. And I'm like, you got super lucky there. Which good thing luck was in their favor in those moments. Have you ever hunted antelope before?
I have. I think it was probably the third animal I harvested on
Oh,
my
cool.
uncle and auntie's ranch whenever I was younger. So I was super fortunate my first year of actually hunting. Whenever everybody found out I got my hunter safety at such a young age, I think I killed a turkey that year. I killed an elk, an antelope, and then a mule deer. So it was a pretty good year for my very first year of hunting.
Nice. Yeah, that's awesome. Was your antelope hunt with a bow or with a rifle?
It was with a rifle.
Nice. Okay. Yeah, I hunted them for the first time this year with a bow. I'm addicted. I did not harvest one, but I'm addicted. It's so much fun because you can get so many stalks in a day. They're awake all day. Like you can hunt them from sun up to sundown,
Right.
and most fun hunt I've ever been on. And yeah, like I said, I didn't even harvest one. And I think like they're challenging. Like I've heard they have 300 degrees of vision. So getting super close to them is pretty hard. Um, and like I got to 100 yards multiple times, but that was the closest I got. And I personally am not comfortable taking a 100-yard shot in a super windy conditions too.
Right.
So at that point, you just have to sit there and stare and admire it, and just be like, "Well, I'm glad I made it this close, but I can't get any closer."
Right. You need to have somebody drive a truck behind you. We call, we call them truck chasers here in New Mexico because they come. If someone was to ask me, I think I've seen this on another one of your podcasts too. If someone was to ask me what's the easiest hunt you could go on, I think it would be a rifle antelope hunt.
Mhm.
Honestly, like they're truck chasers. You drive around and they come running at you. Some of them do.
Yeah, yeah, no, and I agree entirely. And there just the number of times I was on that hunt, like, God, I wish I had a rifle in my hand
Right?
because, like, getting honestly to 300 yards isn't that tough. 200 yards, maybe a little bit more challenging because where I was hunting them, flat desert terrain. There was no coverage. Like I have, I have a picture that I took where I had a cow decoy, and I was using that to kind of use as some cover, and I'm hiding behind my cow decoy and a cactus, and that's like the only coverage that I have for miles. But yeah, definitely, it's a good starter Western hunt because I think yeah, I've heard that they chase cars and but moving cars because what I did find when I was out there was they would be just fine if my car was moving and they were like within 500 yards of it, but the second my car would stop, they would kind of like they'd stop what they're doing, they'd look at the car and they'd sit there for like 10 plus minutes and if my door opened, gone they were.
That's funny. Yep. They could be that way. That's funny how you said all you had was a cactus in your cow decoy, because it's crazy. People don't play into that a little bit very much or think into it whenever you talk about archery hunting. And some people are like, oh, I bet you archery hunting is easy. But at some point, you run out of cover in places like that. Like
Mhm.
me and my dad, that bigger, I don't know if you've seen, but when I was in Arizona, we were on a pretty big mule deer,
Mhm.
and I had just shot my deer in New Mexico. My dad hasn't. My dad he won't if me and my dad both have a tag. He won't start hunting until after I harvest something, and
Of
that's
course.
just the way he is. And he won't let me just make him do it. And so when we went on this Arizona hunt, we both have OTC tags in Arizona. I was like, I just shot a mule deer in New Mexico. I'm not stalking a deer. I'll leave my bow in the truck. I don't care. Like it's your turn. You haven't The last thing my dad shot with a bow was an elk here in New Mexico in 2008, and that was the year I was born. So
Uh-huh.
it's been a while. So I was like, "You're going after him." So we got on that big mule deer that I posted on my Instagram story, and that's actually the video my dad sent me from where he was at, and he was 120 yards from that deer, and that deer had 20 plus does on him. So there was eyes everywhere, and that cactus in the video was the last thing he had. He couldn't get any closer than 120 because he ran out of cover. And
Mhm.
so it's like a game, and you just got to play it, I guess.
Yeah, man, it was great. And that's the first time I've ever been anywhere where there's such low cover. Like there were times where I'm on my stomach, like army crawling, and like hoping that I don't get seen that way. And yeah, oftentimes antelope are always with other antelope. I've never seen. That's a lie. I saw a handful of them that were by themselves, but the closer I would get, you would see some that were like a couple hundred yards away. So
Right.
you always have eyes on you when you're hunting a buck and there's does around. That's a lost cause.
Right. Yep. In Arizona, all it is I don't know if you've heard of Ocotillo,
Mhm,
but
mhm.
it's not thick. It's definitely not
Nope.
thick. It's a bunch of sticks going up in the air with some
Mhm.
spiky stuff and cactuses. That's And maybe if you get lucky, there's some big rocks over there. But in Arizona, there's really no cover.
Yeah, it's just definitely a waiting game. A trick that I did here, I had a buddy who got out. He was archery antelope hunting, and I guess they're like very curious critters. So he tied like a piece of toilet paper to the end of his stabilizer, and just like that white toilet paper that was like flailing in the air in the wind, he would have like he'd get to like 150, 100 yards, and they would walk into it because they're curious about what it is and they want to see what it is. So like for anyone who's listening, if you're going on an archery antelope hunt and you want to try something different, put a piece of toilet paper on the end of your stabilizer and hope that it doesn't get in the way of your sight.
Right? That's pretty funny. I have another one with the orcs. Something like
Mhm.
that is we went on a hunt. It was a depredation hunt,
Mhm.
and my it was actually my dad's hunt, and we were with some of the game wardens out there, and they were like, try this with your sticks. And so we put two of the sticks up in the air to look like the orcs' horns,
Mm.
and it kept them around long enough for my dad to get a shot off at like 300 yards. And it's because they're wondering what it is, because it looks like another oryx with the horns. And so yeah, I was holding the sticks up in the air like it was the oryx's horns, and it was working too. So
Yeah, huh. Animals are so interesting, and I love learning different things that can help because I don't know. I think a lot of people are like, "Oh, I'm not going to tell you my secrets," or and not that you have to share spots or anything, but like I don't know. I'm so open to if I am somewhere and someone wants to know. I usually just tell them because I didn't find it. Like that place existed way before I found it, so like,
Right?
it doesn't have my name on it. But yeah, I think it's really cool to learn different tricks like that. Have you ever hunted in another country?
I haven't hunted in another country yet. I've been lucky enough. We've hunted in Arizona, New Mexico, Arizona. I've been to Wisconsin. I've
Hmm.
hunted bears in Virginia, but definitely nothing in a different country yet.
Yeah, I only asked. I'm going to Africa in April, first time I've ever like hunted in another country, and I'm planning to harvest an oryx. But and I'm mostly only going because part of the hunt was an Instagram giveaway that I won. So there's two critters that are free for me. Otherwise, like I got into hunting for the meat, and so when you hunt in another country, you can't bring the meat back.
Right.
But the number one thing on my list was an oryx, and at the time, I didn't know that you could hunt them in New Mexico, and someone had said that. You can hunt them in Texas too, but they're often on like high fence ranches, and it's like a $30,000 hunt in Texas, which is ridiculous.
Right.
But yeah, I think that like I don't know, they're so unique looking to me, and yeah, they kind of look like large horses, but like with horns.
Right. Yep. No, that's super. That's super cool. An Africa hunt would be fun. I think a mountain goat. You guys have mountain goats, right, in Colorado?
Hmm.
So that would be a cool one. I don't know if I would go to a different country to hunt one of those if they're in the States, but I think it'd be cool to shoot one of those with your bow.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. And I hear, so I was at Sheep Show this last week, and I've never been on a goat or a sheep hunt. But it was so cool to hear the stories of like older gentlemen who have hunted sheep all their lives. And like the number one, like most common theme in the stories that people would tell me is they would say, I almost died on that hunt because they live in such crazy terrain and such intense terrain. And even if you're hunting them with a rifle and say you shoot it 600 yards away, you still have to go get it.
Right?
And like it could be in some crazy rocky, steep terrain that seems completely impossible to walk in and to get there, but you got to find a way and you got to get there. So I think that would be super cool with a bow, but even with a rifle, just because they're so challenging to find and then to get to when you do find them.
Definitely, for sure. I think it's some of those stuff is anything that you harvest is really really cool, even if it's with a rifle with a bow. But I feel like with a bow just gives it that extra edge and makes it so much like more sentimental to you.
Yeah, I agree. I was talking to someone not long ago. Where was I? And they were just a big rifle hunter. They've never really bow hunted. And I was like, I think as a bow hunter, you have to accept that you're going to fail more often than not. And I'm sure most people get to a point in their hunting career or hunting lives that like you get more and more successful with your bow.
Right.
But you're definitely still going to fail more often than with a rifle. But because you have to get so close. And I think, like I said, there's times when I was antelope hunting and I'm 100 yards away and it's just a shot that I'm not comfortable taking. But to be that close to an antelope was so cool. And to any animal. So I think that's one of the most, obviously, the goal is always to fill your tag and to harvest an animal. But to experience wildlife in the wild, like in that close proximity, is so rewarding for me.
Definitely, for sure. Another thing that my dad's instilled in me too is like that moment just happened, but if you just sit there and dwell on that, another one's not gonna happen. Like probably 15 minutes before I shot the bull I did with my bow, I had a 6x6 that we had on camera that was just a big great bull come in to 14 yards, and
Mm.
this was we had a hard hunt, and this was the first bull that had actually came in, and I was just sitting there on my knees, like I didn't range anything. It happened so quick, like the sun was barely coming up. My dad hit a bugle, and boom, he lit up like within 150 yards. And my dad was like, "If this is gonna happen, it's gonna happen now." So he put me in a tree, and I was like so shocked, like, "Dang, we just heard an elk bugle, and we haven't heard one the whole past week." And so I waited for him to come in, and I didn't even think like it was gonna work out. And he came into 14 yards and was screaming in my face. And I just remember looking at the tip of my broadhead was just bouncing on my bow, and I was like, "What am I? I didn't draw before. I seen his tines coming in. I could have drawn my bow, but I was so in the moment of just like, wow, an elk that close, screaming his head
Mhm.
off in front of me, that I was like, I totally forgot to draw my bow back, and that elk spooked out, and I walked back to my dad. He's like, "What happened?" I heard him like screaming right on top of you, and I was like, "I forgot to draw my bow back." And he was like, "I." At first, it was funny, and then I was like, "Dang, that kind of sucks. I could have just killed it. I could have just killed an elk, and I totally missed my opportunity." And that's when he was like, "No, we'll get on another one." And then right away, another bull lit up, and we ended up killing that elk. So it's just you always got to give it 110% and not give up.
Yeah, no, I agree entirely. I have two more questions. We're kind of getting closer to an hour here, and then we'll wrap it up. The first one is, do you have any like recommendations for anyone, even especially youth who like are looking to get into the industry?
A lot. I like to watch YouTube videos. So if you're trying to learn something, YouTube's good for hunting. And I mean, some stuff is kind of staged. Like, let's be real, some of it's staged, but there's a lot of stuff you could learn on that. Like, that's one way that you could use technology nowadays. And that's another thing that my dad likes to talk about a lot to me, is how fortunate we are with like Onyx and that kind of stuff, because before it was just you had to read paper maps and topo lines and all that stuff. So it's definitely a little bit easier nowadays to get into that kind of stuff with the resources. So I guess one thing would be to use what you have in front of you for better things.
Yeah, no, I think that's good because, and I always complain too. Like, I love technology and I hate it. I love social media and I hate it. But like you said, use it. You know, you have a phone at your hands. You can use it to play games, or you can use it to learn and as a resource. And if you want to get better or grow a business, like it is definitely, Google is an amazing resource if you know how to use it. So I think that's really good advice. And then the last question, I end all of my episodes asking my guests the same question: what does wild strength mean to you, or what comes to mind when you think wild strength?
Honestly, I think it just means getting out there and being a hunter, working hard,
Mhm.
having fun in the outdoors, and like I said, give it 110%.
Yeah, no, I agree entirely. This has been a great conversation, Diego. If people want to find you, if they want to reach out to you, if they have any questions, where can they find you?
I think my YouTube is working. That was another thing with my age, is for some reason YouTube was like shadow banning me and stuff. But if not, it's MainBeam Addiction, and then my Instagram is MainBeam_addiction. So those are my two main platforms that I'm on right now. And then I have a website where you can shop my apparel, mainbeamaddiction.com. So thank you.